the media to survive and thrive in an entirely new era where we have seen, print publications and others not be able to make the jump into digital in a meaningful and thoughtful way. What are your thoughts on that? I'm happy for anybody to jump in on this. And what are the challenges that you would see in terms of making sure that the quality of the work that is produced is able to be maintained in a context where you are enabling an entire move to digital, and you're doing it in a way that allows there to be a write-off, sort of a capital cost that quickly? Do you think that there are risks to that? Can I just jump in? Sure.
I just want to make sure, because I'm hearing a little bit of a theme here that, if you're doing digital, that there might be a suffering in quality. That's just not the case. The same ethics and the same stuff, the same, whatever that word is, sorry, the steps that you have to go through to produce a proper report, right, whether it's on whether it's on TV, whether it's on radio, whether it's in the paper, whether it's on your phone. I just want to make sure that's also
that's not what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is that how do you make sure that, I guess the question is more like this. How do you ensure that what is news is actually news in that context, right? So I think we have we have quality journalism, we have people that are doing their best, and then you have folks that go into the field and decide that they're journalists. How do you draw that distinction in a way that allows for credible news to continue to make its way to the fore without being subsumed by stuff that might not be necessarily considered veritable misinformation?
100%, but that's based off of the outlet making sure that they're presenting that right information. It doesn't matter which medium you're on. You're going to have talking heads, and you're going to have reporters. You're going to have opinion pieces and op-eds, and you're going to have factual reports. That's always going to be the case. But what I want to address your thing really quickly. When we talk about placing funds for digital transformation, newspapers for a long time had the choice to make that decision to go digital, and a lot of companies decided to maintain what they were doing, and that's their choice. And that's what it did allow, though, is an opportunity, a room of opportunity for new innovators to come into the place, entrepreneurs to step into that field and fill those gaps. And I think that's amazing. And so any funds that are being discussed and explored, if there is going to be a portion that goes to digital transformation, I want to see newspapers sustain, and I want to see legacy outlets who've been here for 40, 50, 60 years still be here today, because there is a trusted value there. But there should also make sure that there's room and there's money attached and for people who took that risk, so that they can continue to grow, because it shouldn't come at the hindrance of people who took that risk.
And I want to come back to that very point. So I know Mr. Champagne wants to jump in, and I think Mr. Tissignon also wants to jump in, but I do want to, Mr. Gomez, come back to that second point after they've had a chance to respond.
Je vais retirer temporairement mon chapeau de président.
I'm going to just remove my hat as a CEO. For now, I've been a journalist for many years. A lot of people don't know the situation of La Presse. We are completely digital now and had profits of $13 million last year. It does not belong to a private owner or a big group, and so I welcome the enthusiasm of my colleague, but it's not true that traditional media are not making the effort. I am the living example of it. We just hired new journalists, and we were told that we will be hiring another 10 in the coming year. And so it is possible, even for legacy media, to make that change and to continue to inform Canadians. We are the most read francophone organization.
Alors, je voulais donner la parole à M. Toussagnan, mais peut-être la prochaine fois. Oui, merci.
Okay, thank you. I go to Mr. Champoux for 2.5 minutes, please.
Ça va aller vite, merci.
I'll be quick. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Champagne, 3 questions regarding the Forum on the Media, our current study. Which groups or which sectors would have the credibility to organize this forum? This is something that will impact a lot of different groups, and there will be difficult discussions to have. And then what subjects should be examined. We can talk about government funding, but we can also talk about the business models. And last question, if you have the time, what role should governments play in this study? Provincial governments, the federal government, what should their role be? The floor is yours. We're talking about the forum in Canada? Yes. It might be difficult for me to respond to the question. There are a lot of actors that are very interested. We saw it on Tuesday. A lot of professors who were there, people who are interested in journalism. So yes, universities perhaps, academics. But there can't be a forum without journalists. Whether it be my colleague next to me, myself, others, press leaders, members of social groups. We also heard comments on trust in the media. We need to talk about that, and we need to put it into context. There was a Statistics Canada survey that showed a correlation between public's trust in the media and public's trust towards their institutions, and I don't think that that's talked about enough, and it will need to be talked about. And what should be talked about? Well, the revenues, of course. I wanted to show earlier how much it costs to produce information, and quality information costs even more because it takes more time. We need to do the verifications to do the work correctly. And so that's something that needs to be talked about. And what do we need? Well, for voices in different communities, there are legacy media that could have better represented voices in Quebec and in the rest of Canada. And so all of those matters need to be looked at. And we need to look at this not in with a political lens. It's a crisis that impacts all of society. So should politicians step aside? No. But there shouldn't be politics played in this matter. It's a societal crisis. Thank you. I think that's all the time I have.
Go to Nikki Ashton. Nikki, 2.5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to ask my question of Ms. Paradko. You talked about in your presentation about the loss of critical voices in the media. You talked about the harassment that journalists that ask tough questions and seek to hold power to account receive, journalists such as yourself. We referenced in the previous question the attack on journalists that have been willing to speak about what is happening in Gaza, in Palestine at this time. Do you think that journalists are less willing to talk about important issues that exist, whether it's Palestine or others, because they think that harassment and potential job loss simply isn't worth it?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to base my answer not so much on my own experience, because I'm not a young journalist, and a lot of the criticisms I get just bounce off of me. They don't bother me too much. But I must tell you, every time I go to a journalism school to lecture students, the first question I'm asked is about abuse and about repercussions, and I'm asked how I face them. This is something that's being, I believe it's not only journalists, women, politicians, doctors, disproportionately women and women of color face this if they are people with strong opinions across the political spectrum. And this is something that young people are watching very carefully, and they are very concerned about it because they come with a sense of a high sense of justice versus injustice, the wanting to speak, but then feeling already that they might be silenced and trying to figure out how to deal with that silence. That has led to what the UNESCO has called, they have a report called the chilling. And it's important to understand that abuse is not only abuse, harassment, or threats. They're not only in the form of bad language that comes your way. It's not only in the form of criticisms that, or even racist criticisms or gendered or misogynistic criticisms. They're also in the form of dogpiling that happens when other journalists or other professionals dog whistle to their followers to attack you. So the criticism itself could appear to be fairly even reasonable. But then what happens, what ensues is the dogpiling of attacks of their followers, and that is also seen as a form of abuse by the UNESCO. So
Thank
these are
you,
all...
Ms. Paradka.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that later on in another round. I now go to the third, who is the, Mr. Kevin Moore. Kevin, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, Mr. Gomez, you started out here today saying you had massive losses because of 18 being passed. Not one of the government have talked about this here today, that you lost because C-18 passed. Can you comment on what you lost with Bill C-18 passing last June? As far as money, as far as staff, as far as vision for your company?
Yeah, I mean, leading up to before August hit, we were hiring a journalist every single month. That's how fast we were growing. Because there were, I mean, you look at one of our pages just on Instagram alone, average amount of Canadians we were reaching every 30 days was 35 million.
What? 35 million? That's the population of this country.
Yeah. And one thing that we found, which was just so fascinating about the digital landscape, is that we didn't look at what we were doing as a Canadian thing. We thought our stories we can export globally. And I thought that was really fascinating, because what we have in this country is such a unique situation where, you know, you can have somebody who looks like me, whose parents were, you know, immigrants, and now I've been able to start something super successful and start to hire people who didn't have a safe place in some of these other newsrooms across the country. I also understand 100% the intent behind C-18. I know the crisis that's taken place. Like I said, I've worked in the second smallest market in this country, and it's Smithers, town of 5,000. And I've also worked in the largest city, and I know what's happening. And so there is a deep need for a strong public broadcaster and sustaining a diverse range of media voices. But it shouldn't come at the hindrance of people who took a risk in this country to create a new ecosystem, to create new opportunities, to give voices to people who were left out of the conversation. And that was always my fear about C-18, was that potentially how it was executed wasn't the right way. The intent, yes, I understand, but how it was executed severely affected people who are creating a whole new format that potentially could have been replicated across the world.
You see, the problem with C-18 is legacy media has the say. They want to shut you down. They want to shut new digital platforms down. They want all the money. And when you get C-18 like it did happen, you're affected. You didn't say much. But all the legacy, you know, Toronto Star had a deal, a side deal with Google prior to C-18. Now they're not maybe going to get as much money as they had hoped, because now Google, 100 million, maybe 75. There still could be side deals. But I think in this country, people, trust has been the issue, and they're looking for news outside the legacy media. I mean, you've proven it. You were in legacy. You went from Smithers to the biggest market. You took the gamble. There's others in this country taking the gamble like you did and are being held back, I believe.
It is unfortunate. And listen, as I said, I believe a healthy media ecosystem is an ecosystem that has all different players. You know, strong players, healthy players that can sustain themselves. I 100% believe that. I just do not believe it should come at the hindrance of people who took a risk to create a whole new ecosystem that was thriving. And so any money that's coming, right, that has been committed, I believe there should be a dedicated stream for people and businesses that created and are created under the premise of living on those same tech giants platforms. We decided we went there first, and we created something sustainable. And so there should be a stream dedicated for us